he was having a real crisis in his mind and thinking maybe about leaving Meghan. No, don't do that, for the sake of public appearance and the kids and
July 2025. Somewhere in the deep, dense bush of northern Botswana, a satellite phone sits on a wooden table inside a canvas tent. It rings, and it rings. On the other end of that line could be the King of England. It could be high-powered Hollywood agents. It could be the Duchess of Sussex, his wife, waiting in a 9-bedroom mansion in Montecito. But for 3 days, nobody picks up. For 72 hours, one of the most protected, watched, and tracked human beings on the planet simply vanished. He went dark. No security check-ins, no emails, no texts home. We are told that Prince Harry went to Africa to walk in his mother's footsteps, to clear landmines and save the world. But when the cameras turned off in Angola, Harry didn't go home. He didn't rush back to the life he built in California. Instead, he boarded a plane to a remote corner of Botswana, cut his communications, and checked into a life he left behind 20 years ago. Reports say he was there to visit a woman he has secretly called Mom for 2 decades, a woman who knows where all the bodies are buried. And insiders are whispering that during those 3 days of silence, the Duke of Sussex wasn't just looking at elephants. He was thinking about the unthinkable. He was thinking about the end of his marriage. To understand why this trip is terrifying for the future of the Sussex brand, you have to understand the Harry protocol. Since stepping back from the royal family in 2020, Harry and Meghan have operated like a single organism. Salt and pepper, as Meghan famously said, "We always move together." But in July 2025, the pepper was missing. Harry arrived in Angola for a high-stakes visit with the Halo Trust. It was poignant, it was powerful, and it was solitary. Usually when Harry travels solo, whether it's to London for court cases or New York for summits, it's a tactical strike, in and out. 48 hours max. He rushes home to the kids, but this time, he didn't turn west toward the Pacific. He turned south. He extended the trip by a full week. He traveled to Botswana, a country he calls his second home. But this wasn't a holiday. It was a disappearance. Sources confirm that Harry went completely off-grid. Think about that. In 2026, you can get Wi-Fi on the summit of Everest. Being unreachable is not a technical glitch, it is a choice. It is a refusal. For 3 days, Harry built a wall of silence between himself and his life in America, and you don't build a wall like that unless you are trying to keep something, or someone, out. So, who was he with? If he wasn't talking to Meghan, who was listening? Deep in the Botswana bush live, Tanya Jenkins and Mike Holding. They are award-winning filmmakers, conservationists, and the keepers of Harry's secrets. He calls Mike Uncle Mike, but it's Tanya, known as TJ, who holds the real power. Harry refers to her as his surrogate mum. They met in 2004, shortly after Harry's wildest years. While the world saw a chaotic, partying prince, TJ saw a wounded boy. She didn't bow to him. She sized him up, she gave him chores, she gave him normalcy. This relationship is so pivotal that when Harry first met Meghan Markle, he didn't wait to introduce her to the Queen or Prince William. Within a month of meeting her, he flew Meghan to Botswana to meet TJ and Mike. He needed their approval. But in July 2025, he returned to them alone. He slept in the camps near Mon, likely at Menaquena, the very place he once courted Meghan under the stars. Imagine the psychology of that. Sleeping in the same tent where you fell in love with your wife, but doing it alone while refusing to answer her calls. He was regressing. He was going back to the mom who knew him before he was the Duke of Sussex, before the lawsuits, before the Netflix deals. He was looking for the version of Harry that existed before the world changed. But why run? Why now? The tabloids want you to believe it's just marital boredom, but the truth is darker. Harry wasn't just hiding from his marriage, he was hiding from a scandal that has stained his soul. Prince Harry is a director of African parks. It's the jewel in his conservation crown. But for years, investigative bodies have been screaming that African parks is built on a colonial model of violence. The allegations are stomach-churning. In the Republic of Congo, rangers funded by the charity Harry helps lead have been accused of systematic abuse against the indigenous Baka people. Reports of beatings, torture, and even more horrific violence have surfaced. One woman reportedly lost her unborn child after a beating from rangers. Harry has been told to resign. He has been told to pull the plug. But he remains on the board. The cognitive dissonance must be shattering. The man of compassion is presiding over an organization accused of atrocities. When he went off-grid in Botswana, he wasn't just resting. He was fleeing the shame. He was fleeing the furious anger of his brother William regarding their recent international tours. He was fleeing the noise. And perhaps, he was realizing that the life he built in Montecito, the brand, the speeches, the corporate activism, is exactly what led him to this moral precipice. The silence of the Okavango Delta provides a unique kind of clarity. There are no paparazzi there. There are no PR consultants telling you how to word a statement. There is only the sound of the wind through the acacia trees and the distant call of a fish eagle. In that environment, the layers of the Hollywood prince start to peel away. You have to wonder what conversations were happening around the campfire with Mike and TJ. These are people who knew Harry when he was just a young man trying to find his way, long before he became a lightning rod for global controversy. They'll represent a life that is rugged, honest, and stripped of the artifice of celebrity. If Harry was looking for a way out, or even just a way to remember who he used to be, these are the only people on Earth who could provide that mirror. For those 3 days, the world didn't exist. The contracts with streaming giants didn't exist. The bitter legal battles with the British Home Office didn't exist. It was just Harry in the bush. But you can't stay in the bush forever. Eventually, the sun sets, the week ends, and the satellite phone has to be turned back on. The question that haunts the Sussex narrative now is, what happened when that phone finally buzzed to life? We know he eventually returned to California. We know he was seen again in the orbit of his Montecito life. But royal commentators have noted that this trip was a key defining moment. They suggest Harry needed someone to help him make one of the most important decisions of his life. When a man ghosts his wife for 3 days to consult with a surrogate mother, the decision is rarely about what project to sign next. Hold D, it is about the trajectory of his entire existence. Is everything okay in the Montecito mansion? The data points are starting to tell a story. The solo trips are increasing. The security excuses for Meghan's absence are piling up. And now, the total blackout in Botswana. In the silence of the wilderness, stripped of his titles and his talking points, Harry was faced with a choice. Continue the Sussex show, with its pressures, its scandals, and its isolation, or find a way back to the wild Harry that TJ and Mike loved? Africa has always been Harry's reset button. After his mother died in 1997, his father took him there to get away from the cameras and the grief. It worked. He fell in love with the continent. He called it the place where he felt more like himself than anywhere else in the world. But in 2025, the reset button felt more like an escape hatch. When he took Meghan there in 2016, it was about sharing his sanctuary. But by 2025, the sanctuary had become a hideout. Returning to Menno Aquena alone is a symbolic act of erasing the romance. It's like visiting the site of a shipwreck to see what's left of the cargo. The 72 hours of radio silence weren't just a technical necessity of the bush, they were a psychological necessity for a man who feels he is losing his grip on his own identity. Think about the contrast between the two worlds Harry inhabits. In Montecito, every move is calculated for maximum brand impact. The clothes, the charities, the carefully timed leaks to preferred media outlets. It is a world of high stakes and high anxiety. Then look at Botswana. It's a place where the dirt is real, the danger is physical rather than reputational, and your value isn't measured by your Q rating. For a man who has spent his entire life being told who he is, first by the palace, then by the press, and then many argue by his wife, the appeal of a place where nobody cares about your brand must be intoxicating. But that intoxication comes with a hangover. The reality of his life is in California. His children are there, his financial obligations are there, his entire future is tied to the Sussex brand. To walk away from that would be to admit a failure so monumental it would dwarf the fallout of Megxit. And then there is the specter of his mother. Everything Harry does is filtered through the lens of Princess Diana's legacy. His trip to Angola was a direct homage to her work with landmines, but Diana also used her fame as a shield and a weapon. She understood the power of the image. Harry seems to struggle with that balance. He wants the privacy of the bush, but the platform of the prince. He wants the moral authority of the humanitarian, but remains tied to organizations like African Parks that are accused of the very things he claims to despise. This internal conflict reached a breaking point in July 2025. You can't stand in a minefield in Angola, claiming to save lives, and then ignore the reports of violence being committed in your name in the Congo. The pressure of that hypocrisy, combined with the reported strain in his marriage, created a vacuum that only the Botswana wilderness could fill. The role of Tanya Jenkins cannot be overstated. In the complex web of Harry's life, she is perhaps the only person who doesn't want anything from him. She isn't looking for a production deal. She isn't looking for a royal connection. She offered him a home when he was at his most vulnerable, and she remains the one person he can't lie to. When he went off-grid, he wasn't just avoiding the world. He was seeking a confession. He needed to talk to someone who knew the boy before the Duke. He needed to know if that boy was still in there somewhere. Insiders suggest that TJ has been a voice of reason, often telling Harry things he doesn't want to hear. If he was contemplating a separation, or even just a radical change in how he and Meghan operate, she would be the one to tell him the hard truths about the cost of that decision. While Harry was in the bush, the media back in the UK and the US were beginning to notice the gap in the narrative. The missing days started to show up in the margins of royal reporting. Why hadn't there been a check-in? Why was the Duchess so quiet? The official line was security and privacy, but the unofficial reality was a prince in crisis. This wasn't the first time Harry had sought solace in Africa, but it was the first time he had done so while his public image was so severely fractured. The African Parks scandal had moved from the niche world of human rights activism into the mainstream. Survival International had ramped up its campaign, and the pressure on Harry to speak out was mounting. By going silent, he wasn't just avoiding his wife, he was avoiding the inevitable questions about his leadership and his morals. The timeline of those 72 hours is a masterclass in controlled disappearance. He finished his duties with the Halo Trust. He thanked the local officials. He did the press photos. And then he vanished. No private jet manifestos that were easily trackable. No social media updates. He moved into the interior of Botswana with the ease of someone who knows the land. He wasn't a tourist, he was a ghost. For those 3 days, he wasn't a duke, a husband, or a father. He was just a man in a tent. But the problem with going dark is that when you come back into the light, everything looks different. The shadows are longer, the cracks are more visible. When Harry finally emerged from his retreat and headed back toward the airport in Mon, the weight of his life must have felt 10 times heavier. Royal experts have pointed out that the Sussexes have been spending more and more time apart. The united front that defined their first few years in America has given way to a separate track strategy. Meghan is focusing on her lifestyle brand, her podcasting, and her solo philanthropic efforts. Harry is leaning back into his old life, the military, the global conservation, the solo travel. But the Botswana trip was different. It wasn't just a separate track, it was a derailment. It was a moment where the two tracks didn't just run parallel, they went in opposite directions. Meghan was in the high-glamour, high-pressure world of California, while Harry was in a place that represented the total rejection of that world. The distance between them wasn't just geographical, it was ideological. The African Parks scandal is the piece of the puzzle that makes the marital trouble theory so much more credible. It's one thing to have a disagreement about where to live or how to raise children. It's another thing entirely to have your moral compass shattered. If Harry feels that his association with African Parks has compromised his integrity, he likely blames the brand-building machine that kept him in that position for too long. He was the president of the organization. He was the face of it. He used his royal status to bring in millions in donations, and all the while the Baka people were allegedly being terrorized by the very rangers his organization trained. To a man who views himself as a champion of the vulnerable, this is a soul-crushing realization. And when you are in that kind of pain, you go to the person you trust most. You go to Mom. You go to TJ. The conversations in that tent in July 2025 likely covered everything from the legal strategy for the African Parks fallout to the state of his relationship with his brother. William and Harry are now more estranged than ever. The Nigeria trip in May 2024 was seen by the palace as a fake royal tour, an attempt to play at being royals without the responsibility or the oversight. William was reportedly furious. The king was hurt. Harry was left with no family in the UK and a crumbling reputation in the US. In that context, Botswana wasn't just a trip, it was a sanctuary. It was the only place left on Earth where he wasn't being judged by his family or his critics. But the sanctuary is temporary. The Botswana Protocol, the decision to go dark and seek counsel from his surrogate family, is a signal that the status quo is no longer sustainable. You don't take a week-long soul-searching trip to your second home if everything is fine at your first home. You don't cut off all communication with your wife for 3 days if the marriage is a rock-solid partnership. The silence was a message. It was a message to the world, to the palace, and most importantly, to Meghan. It said, I am still my own person. I still have a life that you are not a part of. I still have people who knew me before you, and I still have a place where I can go to be free of you. As we look at the fallout of this trip, we see a Duke of Sussex who is more isolated than ever. He is caught between two worlds. He can't go back to the royal family, at least not in the way he was before. The bridges are not just burned, they are obliterated. He can't stay in the Sussex brand indefinitely if it continues to be plagued by scandal and marital rumors. And he can't live in the Botswana bush forever, no matter how much he might want to. He is a man without a country, a prince without a throne, and a husband who seems to be searching for a way out of the very life he fought so hard to build. The 72 hours in the bush were a glimpse into a life Harry is terrified he lost. A life of purpose that isn't tied to a Netflix contract. A life of conservation that isn't marred by human rights abuses. A life of family that isn't defined by tabloid headlines. He came back to Montecito. He turned the phone back on. He resumed his duties. But the Harry who returned from the bush was not the same man who left. You can't spend 3 days in the wilderness, staring into the void without the void staring back. He came back, but for 3 days he was truly gone. And maybe, just maybe, a part of him never left that tent. The implications for the marriage are profound. Royal marriages have survived many things, affairs, scandals, wars, but they rarely survive the total psychological withdrawal of one partner. When Harry decided to go off-grid, he was practicing for a life without the Sussex infrastructure. He was testing the waters of independence. He was seeing if he could stand on his own 2 feet in the place he loves most. The fact that he stayed for a week and the fact that he went silent for 3 days suggests that he liked what he found. He found that he didn't need the constant validation of the California machine. He found that his second family still loved him, regardless of his titles or his bank account. The African park situation continues to simmer. The calls for Harry to step down are getting louder. The Baka people are still waiting for justice, and the royal family is still watching from across the pond, seeing their wayward son drift further and further into a crisis of his own making. The Botswana trip didn't solve these problems. If anything, it highlighted them. It showed a man who is desperate for a clean slate but is covered in the ink of his own choices. The 72-hour blackout was a moment of peace, but it was the peace of a man in the eye of a hurricane. Outside that circle of silence, the storm is still raging. What does the future hold for the Duke and Duchess? If the Botswana Protocol is any indication, we are entering a phase of decoupling. We will see more solo projects, more separate travel, and more strategic silence. The salt and pepper era is over. The pepper has found a different seasoning. Whether this leads to a formal separation or just a permanent shift in their public and private lives remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the trip to Botswana in July 2025 was the moment the mask slipped. It was the moment Harry chose his second family over his first, his past over his present, and the silence of the bush over the noise of his marriage. The images of Harry walking through the minefields of Angola will be the ones that the history books use. They are the official narrative. But the real story of July 2025 isn't in the minefields. It's in the quiet camp near Mon. It's in the conversations that weren't recorded. It's in the phone calls that weren't made. The Botswana Protocol was a silent revolution, a prince reclaiming a small part of himself in a world that wants to own all of him. He eventually got on the plane. He eventually flew back to the life he chose. But as he looked out the window at the receding plains of the Okavango, he must have known that the most important part of him was staying behind, tucked away in a canvas tent, guarded by a woman he calls Mom. The world will continue to watch. Every solo appearance will be scrutinized, every missing anniversary will be noted. The security concerns will continue to be used as a shield, but the public is starting to see through it. They are starting to see a man who is lost, and a marriage that is struggling to keep him anchored. Africa was supposed to be the place where Harry and Meghan built their future. Instead, it has become the place where Harry goes to remember his past. The 72 hours of silence were a warning shot. They were a sign that the Duke of Sussex is no longer following the script. He has written his own protocol now, the Botswana Protocol. And in that script, he is the only one who knows how it ends. As the sun sets over the Okavango, the shadows of the trees stretch across the red earth. It is a place of ancient rhythms and brutal truths. In the bush, you either adapt or you perish. There is no middle ground. Harry has spent years trying to find a middle ground between his royal heritage and his new American life. He has tried to be a celebrity and a humanitarian, a rebel and a traditionalist. But in July 2025, in the heat and the dust of Botswana, he may have finally realized that you can't be everything to everyone. You have to choose. You have to decide which life is worth living and which one is just a performance. For 3 days, the performance stopped. For 3 days, the world had to wait. And for 3 days, Prince Harry was finally, truly free. But freedom in the bush is a fleeting thing. The plane is always waiting. The phone is always there. And the life you left behind is always calling you back, whether you want to answer it or not. The tragedy of the Sussex narrative is that the very place that brought them together is now the place that is pulling them apart. Botswana was their Eden. It was the place of their third date, the place where they sat under the stars and talked about changing the world. It was the place where Harry gave Meghan a ring with a diamond from Botswana. But Eden is a hard place to return to once you've been cast out. When Harry returned in 2025, he wasn't looking for a new beginning. He was looking for a way to process the end. The silence wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a mourning period. He was mourning the man he used to be, the brother he used to have, and the marriage he thought would save him. The African park scandal will likely be the catalyst for the next chapter. If Harry is forced to resign or if the organization is dismantled, his identity as a conservationist will be in ruins. If his marriage continues to fracture, his identity as a husband will be gone. He will be left with nothing but his memories and his second family in the bush. Tanya and Mike will still be there. Botswana will still be there. But the prince will be a different man. He will be a man who knows the cost of silence. He will be a man who knows that sometimes the only way to find yourself is to get lost. And in July 2025, Prince Harry got as lost as a man can get. The story of the Botswana Protocol is still being written. We see it in the way Harry carries himself in his recent solo appearances. There is a weariness there, a distance in his eyes. He is back in the light, but he is still carrying the darkness of the bush with him. The 72 hours are over, but the silence remains. It is a silence that speaks volumes about the state of the royal family, the state of the Sussex marriage, and the state of a prince who went to the end of the earth to find a mom who would tell him the truth. He found her, he heard the truth, and now he has to live with it. When the voice actor reads these words, they must capture the duality of the situation, the rugged beauty of Africa versus the cold reality of the scandals, the warmth of the second family versus the distance of the biological one, the hope of the 2016 romance versus the isolation of the 2025 retreat. This isn't just a story about a trip, it's a story about a soul in transit. It's a story about a man who realized that his place of safety was no longer safe, and that the only way to survive was to disappear, if only for a moment. The Botswana Protocol was a test of strength, a test of loyalty, and a test of love. And as the world watches the Duke of Sussex navigate the aftermath, they are left with one question. When the phone rang in the bush and Harry finally picked it up, what was the first thing he said, and who was he saying it to? As we conclude this investigation into the Botswana Protocol, we are left with a final image. A lone man sitting by a fire in the Okavango Delta. The fire is dying down, the embers are glowing red, and the sky is filled with a million stars. He has no phone. He has no security. He has no title. He is just Harry. For 72 hours, that was enough. But then the sun came up, the plane arrived, and the Duke of Sussex had to go back to being the man the world expects him to be. He went back, but he left a piece of himself behind, buried in the sand near Menyo-Aquena, waiting for the next time he needs to vanish, the next time he needs to go dark, the next time he needs to remember what it feels like to be free.